Awesome. Hi, you too.
Hello.
Ron is a legendary Chicago theatrical director and performer. And he is a resident artist at the Court Theater. And Sadia Davis is a producer and creative strategist. She is also the director for the Center for Creative Entrepreneurship, and she played a pivotal role in developing the KCA, where we are right now. So, now I was rather new to Baldwin's work before this event, but in preparation and while I read Dr. Glaude's book, Begin Again, I've gathered that so many people didn't really understand what James Baldwin was saying or really hear his voice. And the book delves into how he found his voice and really hearing what Baldwin was actually saying. So tonight we have the amazing opportunity to speak with celebrated author and scholar, Dr. Eddie S. Glaude. So without further ado, we're thrilled to introduce him and get him on the screen. Hi, Dr. Glaude. We're so excited to be chatting with you this evening.
It's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to it, and thank you for the gracious introduction.
Yes, awesome. So you wrote this incredible book, Begin Again, and I loved it. I listened to it on audiobook, which was a treat because you got to narrate your own words, which was really great to hear, and you have a very soothing voice to listen to, I feel like. But I'd love to just start out with hearing, Dr. Glaude, why you chose James Baldwin, and out of all the people you could have chosen, what drew you to Baldwin and what inspired you to write this book?
Wow, that's a wonderful question. I'm just glad to be here with you guys. So let me just say, I've been teaching Baldwin for close to 30 years, struggling with him, fighting with him, being afraid of him in some ways. And I knew that Baldwin had grappled with his own despair and disillusionment. He said that, he couldn't suffer despair because that would be the end of him. He wasn't quite telling the truth. Baldwin tried to commit suicide twice. And so I knew that he had to deal with the sense that the country had betrayed us. He witnessed the civil rights movement. He witnessed the country set the stage for the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he had to pick up the pieces. He collapsed in the face of that. So here, I've been teaching him for 30 years. I've been kind of working through his corpus. And here I was in this moment, thinking to myself, after the country had elected Donald Trump, damn, they've done it again. Feeling a sense of profound betrayal, trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces, how to bear witness, now that it seemed that the country had doubled down on its ugliness again. And so I reached for Jimmy, what he called the ruins. I went to his work, and there I found Begin Again. So in a way, the book is not about Baldwin. It's me writing with him, kind of taking in his insights as I try to think about our current moment in light of his wisdom.
That's awesome. I think, well, I love what you said about how you were writing sort of with him. And I think because of that, those who read the book have a chance to learn a bit more about the man himself and less about just the works that he made. And I just think it's a cool chance to learn things that people might not have known about Baldwin. And I just wanted to shift towards his impact on the arts. And I don't think many people think of James Baldwin as a playwright, but he was. And for us on stage, our first love is theater. And I'd love to talk a bit more about Baldwin's relationship to the theater. And I'd just be remiss if I didn't ask you what Baldwin's relationship was to theater and how his truth manifested himself in his theatrical pieces.
I'm sorry.
Oh, wow. Oh, sure.
I'm sorry, Dr. Glaude. What you just said was so heavy in that there's a point in your book where you talk about trauma did not come at the end, rather it framed the story. So before we get into theater, I just wanted to acknowledge that so many of us have gone through, no matter what race, a sense of trauma in this last year with COVID, with it being 2020, maybe 2020 vision, and being having to reconcile our differences and the racism that exists and the trauma that it creates every time somebody doesn't acknowledge it, right? So I just wanted to speak on that for a moment before we jump into theater. Sorry about that.
Sorry, I got so excited. I'm like, we're in a theater and we
No,
want to chat about theater.
No, I think that's such an important point. You know, the spine of Begin Again is No Name in the Street. It is the first book Baldwin writes after the assassination of Dr. King so it's published in 1972. And Baldwin is trying to tell a story about what has happened from Little Rock to the assassination of Dr. King to the cries of Black Power. And he's dealing with death and trauma and wound. And so the book, No Name in the Street, reflects, right, the fragmentation that trauma causes, you know? And so when we think about our own moment, right, the public lynching of George Floyd, the video footage of police killing us, right? Or the fact that close to 600,000 Americans are dead. That number rivals the Civil War. Right. And that now we're just talking about, you know, just opening up and beginning again. To no pun intended, right?
Right.
And so I think it's really important to understand that Jimmy is really grappling with that human element, that quality of life, where darkness threatens to overwhelm, and wanting us to look the ugliness of who we are squarely in the face and to run towards our fear and to grapple with our grief. And the stage becomes so critical for that to happen for Baldwin. You see, I got DJ quality. You see how I mixed that, brought it back? You know, when you think, you know, one of some of the most, I think, explicit reflections that Jimmy offered about the stage, you can find in his 1976 book, The Devil Finds Work. Right, the way in which he talks about Kenneth Lee's performance of Bigger Thomas and how it moved him. The way he talks about Voodoo, Macbeth, this black character, you know, where black characters played Macbeth when he was a child and how it just fundamentally transfixed him. And there's a way in which he imagines the stage as this kind of place where the tension between the real and the imagined happen, collide, right? And an actor brings the fullness of herself to the stage, even as she plays a character. And it's precisely in that tension that Baldwin thinks, right, that there is some connection made between human beings, right? Some bridge that is built, right, as he would say in The Artist's Search for Integrity, right? That bridge to each other, to one another's suffering, right? And so the stage becomes this amazingly critical space for him to actually explore his aesthetic. We see it, you know, in the Amen Corner. We see it, I mean, explicitly in the Blues for Mr. Charlie. We see in how he staged the play when he was in Turkey. Even when he sent his play to Lorraine Hansberry, you see it in the letters between the two. And he's asking Lorraine to put the play before someone, and she responds to him with his begging ass. You know, it's hilarious, right? So, but there's a sense in which the stage becomes this amazing place for Baldwin to explore one of the key insights of his corpus, right? That we have the opportunity to recreate each other by recognizing our relationship to each other. And that happens in a very unique way, according to Baldwin, in theater, if that makes sense.
Yes, totally.
Well, if I could add to that, I feel like, and to go along with that, the theater, even if it's not on the stage, theater is life. You know, so a lot of the things that he talked about and felt, and you know, I always say, film is art, theater is life, and television is furniture. Okay? So theater is real life. So when you read about, you know, his novels and you hear about what's going on with him, it's going on with all of us, you know. And I was kind of watching some of the old James Baldwin's interviews, and he was on the Dick Cavett show years ago, and I remember it as a young man watching that, and you could actually literally put him in today, on a talk show today, and he could say the same thing, and it would be as relevant.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So I think that it's all theater. You know, the novels, the films, all of that. What we go through in society, sometimes a writer can make that happen on stage and they can say something. Like I'm not marching as much anymore because, you know, my knees hurt a little bit. But we can do it on stage, and we can get that social awareness in our theater and life. And so with Blues for Mr. Charlie and the Amen Corner, which are two plays that I did as a young actor coming up, it tends to make you look at life in another way when you do it that way, when it's coming through the eyes of someone who is so expressive about what is happening to him as a people. You know, so I feel it's all part of the same arena, so to speak, whether it be social media, theater, film, art, television. It's all theater, so to me. And he affected us that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ron, you bring up a really good point in that it's cyclical. Okay, so then how and what do we do to break it? And one of the things, Dr. Glaude, you said, this is us, you know? And it was a moment where it was like I could feel it through the screen of that frustration of people denying the truth. Like, we have to acknowledge who we are. And, you know, over the summer, so many people were exhausted. Black people were like tired. Like, we're like, I'm tired. I'm tired of having this conversation. I need my friends, I need my white family to lift this conversation, activate. And I think that maybe, and you know, I didn't live in the 60s, but maybe from those friends and families that said, you know, finally we're out and it feels like there's some movement that's happening. And I wonder from you, Dr. Glaude, what you think in terms of how do we move forward? How do we break that cycle? How do we absolutely acknowledge, even though there's pain and there's trauma for everyone, but to acknowledge it so that we can heal from it?
Yeah, that acknowledgement is so important. It's a basic Emersonian insight, Ralph Waldo Emerson, right? That is to say, in order to reach for a higher self, you have to accept the self that you are in order to leave it behind, you see? And so there's this sense in which Baldwin is demanding, Jimmy is demanding that we, encounter honestly who we are, right? That what is so distinctive about the American project is that we are comfortable in our myths and illusions because we don't want to look the ugliness of who we are squarely in the face. So there's a kind of adolescence that defines this place, right? We want to remain in this kind of perennial space of innocence. And Baldwin says the innocence constitutes the crime, you see. So he tells us to run towards our fears, right? To confront the ugliness of who we are. That becomes the precondition for imagining ourselves differently, you see. In so many ways, I think, as a reader of Baldwin over these years, you know, he believes honestly in the Socratic dictum that the unexamined life is not worth living. Mm-hmm. This is why I drank too much Jameson while I was writing this book. I drank too much Irish whiskey. And the reason is because Baldwin is an exacting companion. He's telling me over and over again, right, that if you're going to write about this place, oh boy, you're going to have to deal with you now. Because the messiness of the world is actually a reflection of the messiness of our interior lives. So you're going to have to be honest with who you are as a precondition for us to imagine ourselves otherwise. So before I could get my sentences to dance on the page, I had to deal with the fact that I'm a wounded little boy who still has daddy issues. I had to deal with what was in me, you see. And then once that happened, suddenly I was free enough, right, to confront the nation. So what Baldwin is constantly saying over and over again is stop lying to yourself.
Right.
Grow the hell up. Right? Step into a kind of maturity where you can confront the ugliness of what you've done, and that confrontation will release you into a different way of being in the world. But see, America is content with being Never Never Land. You know, and what's distinctive about Never Never Land is populated by lost boys and lost girls who never want to be responsible, who never want to be accountable for anything, you see. And that seals our fate, it seems to. So how will we get to the other side of this? Where will we land if we are ever to get out of history's ass pocket? well, it requires that we grow up, it seems to me.
You know, but that has been something that we've been saying for so long. How are we going to get on the other side of this? You know, even that's why I say, even though he was talking in 1969 or 68 on some of those shows, he could be right here and we're asking the same questions. How are we going to get on the other side of it? And, you know, now there's more social media and this and that, so the word is out there. But, you know, when you think about someone who leaves the country and goes to Paris and around the world and sees all these different cultures and the way that people are living, but yet in his heart he had to come back. Mm-hmm. He had to come back because his people are going through it. So that says a lot about someone in itself, that I can't leave. I got to deal with it and try to help us get to the other side. Now, but it's going to be, you know, it's a battle that continues, and you know, we're still fighting, and again, his spirit to me in my work, I think of that philosophy and the way the things that he would say on some of those shows and his writings, those things live in us today. Wouldn't you agree, Dr. Glaude, that that's still around us in us today? Some of the philosophies that he said.
Oh, absolutely. We're just now catching up with him.
Right.
In so many ways, right? So, you know, you see Baldwin quotes all over Black Lives Matter. You see folk reaching for him, not just simply because, you know, Black Lives Matter has been led principally by queer men and women, right? Trans women and men, right? That there's a sense in which Jimmy's insistence on thinking about this place, honestly. You know, I think he's perhaps the most prescient critic we've ever produced around American democracy and race. And, you know, I think, you know, it's right. I think you're right. He had to leave the country. He knew he had to leave the country. Because he said he had to figure out where Jimmy began and where this idea of the Negro ended. And in order to engage in that kind of excavation of the self, he had to get out of this onslaught of ugliness and evil that comes at you in this place, right? So Baldwin said he had to leave because if he didn't, he was either going to kill somebody or he was going to be killed. And then he says, but once he landed in Paris, he realized that he brought all that mess over with him because it was interior. It was on the inside. It was in the gut, you see. And so it's through this exploration. So he never really leaves America. America becomes the basis. He just needed some distance, rather, to think about the place. And as you say, you know, the people he loved were still here. The sound of the rhythm of black speech, the music, the culture, the food. Yes, the food. Jimmy's cooking all the time. Right, the food, right? So that becomes the basis of his aesthetic and artistic practice. You know, so he never leaves. He just needs the distance and the freedom to think about it. You know, I think, yeah, that's what I came across in the book.
But I think that's something that we can learn from, and what you're saying is that when, you know, we talk about meditation, we talk about that space that we need to give ourselves in order to hear ourselves. And I feel like so many people had an opportunity during the pandemic when we all first went in, right? All of a sudden, everything stopped. All the entertainment, no concerts. And we were all, in a sense, faced to hear and listen to ourselves. So, you know, 2020 was 2020 vision on so many levels. But I really want to anchor what you just said, because it is in those quiet moments that we can hear truth. Because we can feel it, right? We know when somebody's wrong. We know when we're wrong. And one of the things that I love about James Baldwin is that I did watch these Dick Cavanaugh tapes, and I didn't know that side of Baldwin.
Oh.
I didn't. And it shook me at my core, because it, you know, to Ron's point, we're having the same conversation. I happened to go to Paris, and I found that the news was different. I found that the news was more informative there than it was here. but I choose to live here. And in doing so, when we make those choices, then we have to find our peace in making sure that we are able to live together. I have something that I want to ask you.
Sure.
So it's been a pleasure and an honor, one, to be in conversation with you, but also I had the honor of having dinner with Dr. Toni Morrison. And she was actually an editor before she was a writer. And we were having dinner, and she told me that she was 40 when she wrote Sula. And so she said, "Now, how old are you?" And she said that she would ask her students, "Well, how old are you?" And then they would say their age, and then she would say, "Well, you haven't lived long enough to know anything, to write anything yet." So I say to you, Dr. Glaude, how old were you when you found your voice? Because it's powerful, and I'm just curious, how old were you when you found it, when you felt like you had something to say?
Wow, so those are, oh my God, I remember that moment with Toni. You know, I introduced her to my then fiance, and I said, "She's the love of my life." And she said, "You don't have a life. You ain't lived long enough to have a life." It's hilarious. It was hilarious. And true. So I knew I always had something to say. I just didn't know how to say it. And whether or not I could recognize when I said it. The best analogy I could use would be a jazz musician. So you listen to early Coltrane or early Wynton Marsalis. What are you hearing? They are playing like the people that matter to them. He's trying to figure out, well, what is Coleman Hawkins doing here? He's thinking with the people whose sound become the foundation for what Coltrane will become. When you listen to early Wynton compositions, you can see that he's thinking through Duke Ellington. He's thinking right with him in some ways, right? Trying to figure out what he's trying to say. So I've spent 30 years trying to figure it out. Written academic books, participated in this citational practice where you're always giving kind of voice to those people with whom you're in conversation with, trying to show your work, right? And it's only recently, and my God, with the help of Jimmy, that it happened, that I dared to write my sentences. So Begin Again is the book, and I'll say this with it's my intention to announce to the world that I'm a writer. And the only reason why it became that is because in order to write with Jimmy, I had to be able to tell him he was wrong. I couldn't imitate him because I failed miserably, right? But I could hear the rhythm of his sentences, and I know the rhythm of my sentences. And the thing is that when you're working with the writer of this magnitude, you have to be careful because he can run you flat over.
Right.
Right? And so when he said to me, I'm sounding kind of spooky, but I have Reverend Barber sent me a spirit candle of Jimmy while I was writing. And the other one that he sent was burned. It's always burned down. So between the spirit candle and Jameson, I was writing. And so when he said to me, "If we're going to do this, old boy, together, you're going to have to deal with you," it was this kind of, okay, let's get to the page and risk yourself. And then that's when I heard my voice, right? Now, I've heard it before. I could recognize my sentences, but I was able to risk myself on them. And then that just changed everything. And then I'll say this too, because your question is so brilliant. It just opens up so much for me. It also allowed me the freedom to play with form. So the book isn't literary criticism. It isn't social criticism. It isn't memoir. It isn't biography. It's some odd combination of all of those things. And it's also this book that tries to mirror how we remember So it's fragmented, it's moving back and forth, trying to do something that Jimmy does in No Name in the Street. So that's a long-winded answer to the question. When did I find my voice on the page? While I was writing The Given Gift.
All right. Well, it's such a good book. I mean, it's a great answer.
Thank you for asking that question.
Yeah.
Yes, everyone should read the book if you haven't. It's incredible, and I really, I think that's so cool to hear you talk about how you found your voice, and it just sort of reminds me about how in the beginning of the book you talk about how James Baldwin went to Paris and all of his travels, and how you also traveled, and like this concept of escapism, and sort of like how that plays a role in finding your voice. And I think that's a really interesting concept, because then it makes me think of, in theater, some people say theater is like escapism, like there's you can escape to the theater and do that. And so I think just kind of, I'm not sure what my actual question is, but just sort of how that relates to each other.
Well, I would say, Dr. Glaude, he wrote the two plays, wanted to find his voice in the theater, but it seems like he wasn't able to do the things he could do in a novel or in essays like he could with a play. So do you think that that's kind of why he concentrated more on those writings in the later time, like The Fire Next Time and things like that, that those are hard to even, I've even tried to adapt some of the works to the stage, and it's like, that's kind of difficult, because he was saying something in a different way, and it seems like he was like, man, forget the theater, let me just be direct, and let me say what the deal is, and talk about it that way. Would you think that had anything to do with it? He found more powerful voice in the novels, in the stories, in the essays?
I don't know. I wouldn't say that. I think, he ran, you guys know this, he ran into the trouble of the American theater. Right? The constraints.
Yeah.
Of what theater is, right? People saying that, the fact that he began Blues for Mr. Charlie with Richard being dumped in the river, that he killed the dramatic suspense of the play, that, they want to read it in this realist way and not really deal with what he's doing at the level of form with Blues for Mr. Charlie.
Right.
Or the fact that the characters in Amen Corner, the theatricality of the everyday requires that you give Black life a kind of depth, a depth that goes beyond this tangled web of pathology, right, of our oppression. And so, I think Baldwin always looked to the stage. He just had a difficult time trying to imagine, right, fitting what was going on in his head within the constraints of what the stage demanded, right? It's like, it's like people trying to figure out what Lorraine Hansberry was doing after Raisin, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. And limiting what she was trying to do after Raisin, right? So I think Baldwin's novels, for me, have not been the place where I found my feet. I find my feet in his nonfiction essays. Mm-hmm. Although, 1968, he publishes, Tell Me How Long the Trains Have Been Gone. And at the center of that novel is a stage actor. That's the central character. Right? So he's using an actor as the vehicle for what he's doing in that novel. Again, offering his theory of performance within the context of that form. So, so that's a meandering answer. But I know he had, in his papers at the Schomburg, there are elements of another play that he was working on.
Well, that's interesting too, because the theater, you mentioned Lorraine Hansberry, and I know they were good friends, and I had the opportunity to work with a Raisin in the Sun production that her husband Robert Nemiroff was producing, and Philip Rose, the original producer, were involved in it, and being able to hear some of those stories and behind the scenes of Raisin in the Sun, and what you're talking about, the constraints and the censorship, so to speak, they made her make a lot of changes in A Raisin in the Sun that, she had to do because of the period. I know theater nowadays, if he was able to write, there's all kinds of openness to different kinds of theater, but back then it was a little difficult. A lot of people don't know this, but Raisin in the Sun, the final ending that she had was Lena, Mama, coming back, getting the flower, the planting, going to the house. The original ending had a riot outside the house, and it had the family at the window, protecting that house with guns. And the producers were like, no, we can't have none of that in 1957, And so they made the change. Robert Nemiroff told us about that. And listening to those stories of the battle, the fight that she had to get that done. I mean, Trouble in Mind was supposed to be that play that they wanted to be on Broadway, first black woman and everything. But Alice Childress was like, no, I'm not changing it. So
Exactly.
that leads to what you're saying, though, is that, James Baldwin was like, no, I'm not going to deal with that,
Right.
So that I feel you on that. I can understand how he would, find that pretty confining.
The battle he had over the production of Blues for Mr. Charlie, right? The struggle with the Actors Guild, right? The Actors Studio, rather. I mean, there's in one of his biographies, he's looking at the production, and he climbs up one of the things and just cusses everybody out. I mean, there's a sense in which he did not want people to distort what he was trying to do with the play.
Right.
You see what I mean? And it had a short run. It didn't have the run that we thought it would, or he thought it would. So.
Yeah.
Wow, well, I know that we have some audience questions that we'll get to in a second, but I want to make sure if you two, Sadia or Ron, if you have any questions that you just wanted to throw out to Dr. Glaude. I know, Sadia, your book has got tabs, you've got lots of highlighting and lines, so yeah, I just wanted to throw it to you before we do any audience questions.
Well, on that note, I will say, just on what we were last speaking on, there's a small poem that you put in here on page 152, and it says, it's the 1983 poem, Staggerly Wonders. Lord, history is weary of her unspeakable liaison with time. For time and history have never seen eye to eye. Time laughs at history, and time again, time traps history in a lie. And I say that after what you just said and what Ron just said, that we really start to tell the truth. It might be painful, but like Dr. Glaude said, we got to grow up. It's time to grow up. And I think that this book is really a way for us to begin again, especially after what we've all been through collectively together.
And I think that's what he did. He told the truth. On some of these debates and stuff, they try to say, well, you're doing all right. You have money. You this, you that. But it's not about the individual. And that's what, that's what he would say. It ain't about me. It's about my people. That's part of me, So anyway, I mean, it's just great to read. And kind of on the other side of what Saudi was saying is that I was just the opposite. I didn't know the writing side of him as a kid growing up. I knew that other side, seeing him on these shows and stuff without having read the books. I was like, who is this guy? When I got a little older, I was like, I think I want to read one of these books. And because of what he's saying and what he's doing and the difference that he's making in my family's spirit and pride about who we were. That was a lot of thing that he influenced us that way, is to say these things about how this country was built on slavery and the way that the economy was, without us, it wouldn't be what it is, and things like that, where people wanted to dispel and say that's not the case. But it is the case. And so, it was that way that I got into Mr. Baldwin, reading his books later.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you think about Blues for Mr. Charlie, and you think about the character Richard, I mean, he is in some ways exploring the relationship between time and history and memory in the very ways in which Richard enters, moves about on the stage. Remember, there are moments in the play where Richard is already dead and he shows up on stage, and he's triggered by a memory of a live character in the thing. So Baldwin, in the very ways in which he structures Blues for Mr. Charlie, is actually thinking through the relationship between time, memory, history, and trauma, right? Because at the heart of it is that someone has been killed. Someone has been killed. Two people have been killed, right? His mother, then him, right? And so I think this is really important to think about the way in which, and Baldwin is kind of meditating on the relationship between time, history, and memory. And this is really important too, because we're living in a time where lies abound.
Right.
Where people are telling the big lie. And then people are refusing, whether they're critiquing the 1619 project or they're critiquing critical race theory. We don't want to hear, we want our lies straight, no chasing. You see? And what Baldwin insisted upon on the stage, in his nonfiction writing and in his fiction writing, always a relentless truth telling. He needed to bear witness until the day cancer took his life. Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote a note down about this, about the bearing witness thing. So when you said that, I was like, oh, I definitely have a note about that, because when I was reading the book in the witness chapter, and how Baldwin believed that being an artist meant to bear witness and to speak for people who cannot speak. And I think, yeah, that's really cool that we, had some chance to talk about how he was involved in the theater and how he sort of did that in his works, bearing witness to what was going on.
That's why it's so relevant for today as well, because that's still a need in the theater.
And that's why
there's
theater
this.
was built. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Dr. Glaude, go ahead.
No, there's this moment in an essay he wrote entitled "The Artist's Struggle for Integrity," and this formulation, I think, translates across his body of work in whatever genre he's working in. And if you don't mind, I want to read it. I hope it makes sense here. You're bearing witness helplessly to something which everybody knows and nobody wants to face. Least of all, the hypothetical misfit who has not learned how to walk or talk or doesn't know enough about experience to know what experience he has had. Well, one survives that no matter how. By and by, your uncles and your parents in church stop praying for you. They realize it won't do a bit of good. They give you up, and you proceed a little further, and your lovers put you down. They don't know what you're doing either, and you can't tell them because you don't know. You survive this, and in some terrible way, which I suppose no one can ever describe, you are compelled, you are corralled, you are bullwhipped into dealing with whatever it is that hurts you. And what is crucial here is that if it hurts you, that is not what's important. Everybody's hurt. What is important, what corrals you, what bullwhips you, what drives you, torments you, is that you must find some way of using this to connect you with everyone else alive. This is all you have to do with it. You must understand that your pain is trivial, except insofar as you can use it to connect with other people's pain. And insofar as you can do that with your pain, you can be released from it. And then hopefully it works the other way around too. Insofar as I can tell you what it is to suffer, perhaps I can help you to suffer less. That formulation is at the heart of his understanding of theatrical performance, and it's at the heart of the ethical impulse of his nonfiction writing and his fiction writing, I think. Suffering becomes the bridge, the connection, right? If that makes sense.
Indeed it does.
Oh, that's what theater is all about, connection and yeah. But now I just wanted to move over to, we have some questions that were submitted from the audience. Oh, there's more questions that I've been given. So I'll just, there's so many options. I'm just gonna pick this top one. But I guess we can talk about how can James Baldwin's practices and works be better incorporated in the lives and work of theater makers? Do you have any thoughts on that question, Dr. Glaude?
I would defer to the folks who are actually in theater.
Yeah.
Well, I could respond to that. Like, I think what we need to do now, because his words and his thoughts were so relevant to today, I think now it's an idea to go back and look at, like I was saying, some of the books were hard to adapt. I think now, because theater has become more expansive in the way that it's projected, and the plays that are not as traditional and they're as conservative, I think to look at some of his works and begin to try to adapt them to the stage, you know? Because now we have incorporated film and video and theater, and there's a lot of ways to be able to say what he was trying to say in some of his stories. Like I can imagine a way to have another country on stage some kind of way.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
to see different vignettes,
Yes.
scenes that could happen. So I think to answer that question, I'd say we need to take a look at some of it and reevaluate and rethink it, and let's, because his spirit is in there.
Yes.
It's in the world. It's in, like you say, Black Lives Matter. You see things about some of these things that he was saying, and if theater is your way to do that, then there's a way to put it on stage and present it in another
And he
way.
wrote a stage version of Giovanni's Room in 1958 that the Actors Studio thought they were going to put on. So we know that there's a stage version of Giovanni's Room. We need more widespread kind of production of Amen Corner and Blues for Mr. Charlie. But I think at the heart of it, we have to Baldwin sought to destroy the sentimental image of the African American, which was so critical to our national fantasy.
Right.
Because for Baldwin, sentimentality is the mask of cruelty, you see. Right. So what does it mean on the stage to destroy this sentimental rendering of black folk? I don't know. That might put Medea into question, but that's a different sort of comment.
What is done sometimes too is, and I've done it with books before, is to take just one chapter of the entire book and make that a story or a stage version, because a lot of the books they're episodes in a life, So we can take a chapter and make that a play or a film or whatever. But I think those need to be re-looked at, But I do feel that way, because there are a lot of people who don't know who James Baldwin was. The young people that don't even know the early theater makers that were doing things. So you're protesting and you're getting involved in the movement without knowing the people who were doing that before. And so it's like I always say, we need, and this is just not me, but pass the baton forward. Don't go back to the starting line. Because he was already there. We are already there. Let's just move it forward. And that's a way to do it, by taking some of his works, his writings, his essays, or whatever, and making life out of them in the theater. I agree with that. Whoever asked that question, that's a good one. That's going to spark something in me. I'm going to start reading some stuff and put it on the stage. Right on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it. I would love to see something like that.
You feel me, Dr. Glaude? You feel me?
I do, Doc. I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I would say that I am one of the young people that was not very well acquainted with James Baldwin before. Actually, I feel like my first introduction to him really was your book, Dr. Glaude. Just Begin Again was my sort of first moment really sitting with some parts of his life, and then I did more research and read the plays and read more of his works. But I think that question also really excites me, like as an actor and artist, just how we can start getting his work out there, and because he has so much to say and so many important things to say that are still very relevant now. We should get it out there. I completely agree.
I agree.
So another question that we have is, how do you believe Baldwin's intersectional identity as a queer black man impacted the reception of his work at the time versus the present? If anyone wants to speak on that.
Yeah, I think, just really quickly, because I would be interested in hearing the other panelists respond. Absolutely, it impacted me. I mean, just think about it. Baldwin's first novel is Go Tell It on the Mountain. And then the second novel is Giovanni's Room. And Giovanni's Room is about, it's a love story, but it's a same-sex love story, right? And it was so controversial that his publisher refused to publish it. He said, okay, fine. He took it over and had it published in London, in England, right? And, he had to tell that story. So Baldwin queers, and I use that in a technical sense, he queers African-American literature, he queers African-American politics. Remember in that line that he says in The Artist's Struggle for Integrity, he says this misfit, that in some ways the misfittedness of Jimmy Baldwin disturbed the peace, right? And so I think his sexuality is critical, but we have to be careful because Baldwin is very suspicious of categories that constrain, that limit. So he wants to deconstruct the very ways in which certain categories, right, constrain how we love and who we love, if that makes sense. But, hey, Eldridge Cleaver was unsettled. King, I believe, was unsettled. And of course, the whole host of others were unsettled by Baldwin, the fact that he was out. Angela Davis told me this story. When I interviewed Angela Davis for the book, she said, in so many ways, he was all by himself. He was out there all by himself. And he still fought. He still fought the battle. Yeah, that's too much.
Yeah, I think very much like what we've already been talking about, this is Pride Month, right? And knowing that he didn't want to not only be defined by his sexuality, but I think he just didn't like people making assumptions about who he was, or he would say, no, that's the experience that you have, don't project that onto me, and I shouldn't have to have a wife or children. And I think that he was just so ahead of his time, you guys, right? I feel like just with Pose, the TV show on FX, it was my first sort of understanding of the transgender world, having transgender friends who drag and dress up, but not understanding their experience, their pain, their suffering, the amount of transgender Black women that are killed on a regular basis, and those stories that are still not told. And I think it goes back and it circles back to the truth. And I think if anything we could learn from him, and Another Country is on my shelf and my favorite, but if anything we can learn in this moment is just shining light on the truth. It's gonna hurt, rip that Band-Aid off, deal with it, and that's easy for me to say. But at some point, he said it, and I'm gonna start leaning on it. And maybe we have to start with ourselves, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think being ahead of his time, being such ahead of his time, I think it influenced a lot of artists during that time. It influences their writing, the pain and suffering that they go through, the things that they have to hold inside. I know sculptors and painters and every artist, they're dealing with the time that they're dealing in, and they have to be a certain way. I know nowadays when we do a lot of plays that we do in a quote-unquote non-traditional way, and people say, well, that wasn't written about these Black people and this and that. But the thing is, because they couldn't write about, those characters couldn't be Black, or they couldn't be this. But if you got a director who's got a vision, who can take a character and add another level to it, that makes it, different. So they're writing at a time when they're shut in, and they can't write what they really would like to write, so they write it anyway, and it comes from a different place. It comes from somewhere of fear sometimes, of pain, and so those kind of things, he was so far ahead of his time. Again, he learned so much going away in Paris and different places. he became, I would say, a different person. I don't want to say better or worse, but, like Malcolm X, same thing. He went away and he learned there are other people that are Muslim that are not this way, So I just think that because of the time that he was writing, it affected who he was and how he wrote. And, it took the world time to catch up to a lot of people, and he was one of those.
Definitely. I think what both of you were saying, but Sadia, how you said, like, rip the Band-Aid off, like, we have to address this. It reminded me of one of my favorite quotes from the book that I wrote down, that just in general, it is not our task to save white people, I believe is what it said. And Dr. Glaude, it just really spoke to me. I was like, you're right. And, decentering whiteness and the white narrative, and especially in the theater world, that really, like, struck me as well. Just, people didn't have the opportunity to write pieces, but also, so we could do those and re-envision them, but also at the same time, it's time for new voices and new ways to.
Well, for example, Blues for Mr. Charlie, if it's done now, it's a totally different thing than when it was done when they first did it. Mm-hmm. And I think, more people are aware of these things that have happened, like, George Floyd and different things, and all the people that have been brutalized. And so it's more out there as something that is not so unique, In Blues for Mr. Charlie, I mean, we think about Emmett Till, and we think about some of the 50s and the things that went on. Now Tulsa, the massacre is in the news and things. But these are things that we know about now. But when that came out, we didn't know about it.
Well, and I was just going to say that. We know about it.
Right.
But it's because of social media and cameras that others got a chance to see what we experience, to see the pain and the trauma that happens on a regular basis.
Right.
I got to say, no, we have another question. Let's get to another question, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I want to hear from the audience.
Yeah, so another question says, so little has changed, as we've been talking about. What might James Baldwin point out is a legitimate advancement in society and in the theater today? It's just an interesting thought to pose. I don't know if Dr. Glaude, you have anything to say about that? Or?
I'm always leery of trying to anticipate what Jimmy would say. Right. He left us over 7,000 pages of writing. We could probably glean from it. I could give you what I've learned from Jimmy, which is my voice. So I don't want to try to ventriloquize in some ways, right? So I think he has this wonderful formulation. He says, the horror of America is that it changes all the time, but America never changes. The horror of America is that it changes all the time, but America never changes. This is the kind of paraphrase of the formulation. And so there's a sense, and there's in uses of the blues, he says, America is like a monotonous minstrel show. The same jokes, the same dances, the same songs. You've done the dance so much you can do it in your sleep, So there's a sense in which this kind of cycle of crisis, of reckoning, of resolution, and then doubling down back on our ugliness, this has been a part of the narrative. So I think there's something unsettlingly familiar about the moment. Mm-hmm. But the demographic shifts of the country, the moment, there's a reason why America in this moment, which is in some ways unprecedented, feels as if it's on the cusp of fundamentally transforming. At the very moment people are doubling down on its ugliness. The way I put it is that there are these moments, and Baldwin says this in No Name in the Street, but I'm going to take the metaphor and use it in a different way. He said, one way to put it is that every time a new America is about to be born, on the verge of, you can see the crown, the umbilical cord of white supremacy is wrapped around the new baby's neck and it chokes the life out. We have to be better midwives.
Ooh. Yeah.
I think that's, perfect timing. That's the perfect point to end on. I think we just have to yeah, we've got a lot of work to do. And it's been a real honor chatting with you all tonight and being in conversation with you, Dr. Glaude, about James Baldwin and what he has had to say and how he's ahead of his time. And just, this has been amazing to talk to you tonight. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
And I just also want to thank our panelists, Ron and Sadia, for your contributions this evening.
Yeah. Thank you. These conversations could go on and on.
Oh, yeah.
And I knew an hour is like, oh, that's nothing. That's like 15 minutes. You know. Am I right, Dr. Glaude?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you, thank you. Thank you for gracing this space with your presence. This is a beautiful opportunity for multiple theater companies to be under one house, and so it is a pleasure for you to join us here in this space on the west side of Chicago.
Yes, thank you. All right, I'm not sure if Dr. Glaude is still with us, but I hope he has a great evening. And I just wanted to, before we leave the stage, give Ron and Sadia, if you have any, sharing any news of any upcoming projects you might be working on or anything you want to plug, I just wanted to give you a second to talk about
wow.
that.
That's great. I didn't expect that. Well, actually, you know, COVID, I'm at Court Theater, a resident artist there, but I do direct all over the city, and COVID kind of shut things down. Court, we were on a virtual thing. We did everything virtually, but life is coming back. We have a current production called the Titanic. It's just called Titanic. It's not the one that everybody knows, a musical. It's more exploring the aftermath of a study of what happened and what made it happen. But then we'll be coming back. I'll be doing a few shows. Timeline, we're doing a new play called Relentless that takes place during the other pandemic in 1918. And actually, she wrote it before this pandemic, so it's just a coincidence. And then I'll be doing Two Trains Running, another August Wilson production. It'll be my 30th August Wilson production, which is a real landmark for me.
That's awesome.
And then I'll be doing a musical blues review show with Felicia P. Fields, the Tony-nominated actress from Color Purple. And that'll be, all those things will be coming around. So RonOJParson.com is my website. Not on Facebook.
Awesome, yeah.
And Sadia?
So as the director for the Center for Creative Entrepreneurship, I'm excited to share with you that August 14th, we will have our first Reframe. That is a creative business, creative entrepreneurs conference. It's really cool people doing really cool shit. And that will be in person at 2112, which is on Montrose and Fort Knox. But what I want to share about that is it's really going to be like these 15-minute hits of innovators, thought leaders in the creative industries. When we say creative industries, that's music, film, video, even culinary, right? Who's at the top of their game, whether they're here or around the world. We're inviting them to come and speak to us, and we'll have our Reframe Awards that evening. So I invite you to check Center for Creative Entrepreneurship website, which is cceglobal.org, where you can find all of the upcoming events. For those business owners in-house, we promote 80% of the educational programming that's out there already. We curate 20%, and then we have an e-learning platform. So if you're at home and you want to learn the business of one of those 9 creative sectors, you can do that from your computer screen, and we can give you the resources and access to capital. So that's Center for Creative Entrepreneurship. And I just also I'm just so happy that you all came out tonight. This is what I call my baby. I don't have any children yet, but this is it. So I hope you found yourself comfortable and happy. And thank you so much to the Oak Park Festival Theater for hosting such an incredible event.
Yes, and yeah, thank you for this space. It's been beautiful. And I mean, if I was gonna plug something, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, what are you gonna plug
But
here?
I am gonna be working with Oak Park Festival Theater on their production of The Tempest this summer as a couple characters, Adrian, Iris, the goddess, and the bosun. But I will have Barbara Zahora come back out and tell us some more about that and any more remarks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I can't thank you all enough. Emma, Sadia, Ron, and Dr. Glaude. That was just an incredible conversation to bear witness to, and my head is like spinning with all the things that I know are going to be happening on stage and everything, and oh, it's fantastic. So yes, we do indeed have a production coming up, and The Tempest is going to be in Austin Gardens right here in Oak Park starting July 17th, and we cannot wait to get back and see people like in 3D. We're very, very excited. And I'd also like to give one more round of thanks to the KCA and the community partners and event sponsors whose generosity helped to make this evening tonight possible, and to thank you all for coming out and joining us in person tonight. It's so exciting to see you. Thank you. And before we sign off for the evening, I did also want to give a special thanks in terms of our upcoming production, The Tempest, to Nancy Clark. I don't know if Nancy's out there with us tonight. Are you? Oh, Nancy, thank you so much. Nancy is a production sponsor for us for this upcoming show. And speaking of, sponsorship and help, if you wanted to help us make more events like this happen or more art, please feel free to donate at www.oakparkfestival.com. Or you can come up here and talk with us a little bit more. So in a moment, we're going to have a quick champagne toast and coffee, your choice, on stage in honor of the folk whose hard work went into this very event. And we'd love to get to know you better and to have you join us if you're able. So please come up. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
I want to grab my
Huh?